So why does Jett Lawrence not switch to the older model CRF 450 that he had so much success on literally last year? That's what we're going to talk about, and it is a interesting, confusing, irritating, but ultimately rational reason as to why this is kind of a problem and isn't quite as simple as just hop on the older model CRF. So it really starts with the homologation rule that is in effect in Supercross and motocross, and that is essentially this: you cannot run a works factory one-off bike in the same way that you can in MXGP. All of the bikes that line up in Supercross have to be fundamentally based on the production bike that you can buy in the showroom. So ultimately, I believe this is a beneficial rule in order to try to level the playing field, try to avoid one company outspending the others and creating some one-off hard to beat machine. And number two is it improves what is available for privateers and recreational riders and amateur riders, because what the top dudes are winning on is what you're able to buy. It also just reduces the overall cost of racing. So ultimately it's a good thing, but in this case, we are seeing one of the drawbacks of this with Jett Lawrence. And it's funny because it immediately strikes me as, are we changing something for the sake of changing it? Because last year's bike, Jett Lawrence and Hunter Lawrence looked phenomenal. It is commonly regarded as one of or the best bike out there. So it's interesting that now, after Honda decided to push the new bike, get it homologated, get it able to be raced by Jett and Hunter, now everybody is looking at it as though they got some things to work out. And I will admit, I rewatched the race, and it is undeniable that Hunter and Jett do not look as good on it now as they did last year. And when you're first watching the race, there's so much chaos, it's hard to focus. But after rewatching it, there does seem to be a disadvantage in regards to the traction and balance available on this bike. I would notice Jett Lawrence's, especially his back end, would routinely tuck out, or also his front end. And really ultimately what it looked sort of in terms of what the most noticeable characteristic was is, instead of, and really Chase Sexton is probably the best example of this, is when the bike is really balanced, you have this just beautiful arc through the corners, and it looks like you're in slow motion because you're just literally on rails. And shout out to Chase Sexton. After watching it again, him and his KTM looked superb. Jett Lawrence, on the other hand, he would routinely go into corners and at the apex of the corners start to break traction, and you wouldn't be able to carry that momentum in that speed. So he was constantly kind of getting bogged down in the corners, and what people who are in the know will say is jumps for show, corners for dough. That is really what determines your speed. And in my opinion, after rewatching it, they definitely did not look as good. So the reason is pretty obvious. Honda wants Jett Lawrence and Hunter Lawrence to race the bike that they are trying to sell and promoting, and that is the new iteration of the CRF. Now, what's interesting is I come from downhill where the sport is a lot smaller, admittedly, so there's less press. The riders can pretty much ride and do whatever they want. And I think if there was a little bit less publicity, Jett and Hunter Lawrence would simply hop on their older model bike. But because the homologation rule, it creates this kind of red tape process where instead of being led fundamentally by what the riders want, what the riders are doing, and allowing that to determine your timeline in terms of what changes you make to the bike, instead of that, because now they have to get it homologated and sell a certain number of units, they have to do that before we get to see the racers on the track actually ride it. And so, as we know, you can test all you want, nothing replicates racing. And so it is this interesting, the downside to the rule, the production rule, is this: now Honda has invested money, marketing, resources. Everybody knows that they're on this new bike. Honda does not want them to go to the older model. Now, it is frustrating because if there was just a little bit more secrecy, it would be nice for the riders to do whatever they want. And this was an issue with Cooper Webb at KTM, running into what forks he wanted as opposed to what forks the team wanted him to run. And there's just this interesting narrative in the sport that the riders are not granted as much leeway in control in determining what they do on the bike as you would think. And partly it's the bikes are complicated. It's, for example, not like a bicycle. These are really complicated machines with ECUs and software, and this is not a simple equation. You need a team of engineers tasked with trying to improve these bikes. So you're obviously never going to chalk it up entirely to the rider. There's oftentimes things that they're not even necessarily going to be aware of that are going to impact it. So it is a balancing act, but it does suck. And it does bring me back to this question is, Honda, why did you change the CRF if it was working so well? And it goes into this, are we changing thing for the sake of changing? We changed a bike, and I don't know all of what they did. I guess I should have looked that up. I will admit that. But it's weird that, okay, the bike last year, everybody loved, especially the Lawrences, the riders you've invested millions of dollars into winning on your bike. Now you've brought about these changes. Now they're struggling. And instead of doing the obvious thing, just hopping back on the older chassis and spending more time figuring out the 25, because the ball is already rolling, they just gotta sort of be forced to work out the new bike's problems. And it's just this weird, like, I'm sure it's frustrating for riders because if you're the rider, you just want to race on what you're most comfortable on and what is the fastest. You don't care if that bike is from 20 years ago, 2 years ahead of us, purple, red, blue, pink. You don't care. You just want to be on the fastest machine. But the companies pay you to promote their bike. You are the face of that company, of that sport, and they need you to promote what bike they are promoting. If they just came out with a new bike and they're getting behind it and they've spent tens of millions of dollars in developing, they don't want their lead riders going back to the previous iteration and making the customers go, well, why would I bump up if clearly the last bike was better? So it's this interesting duality, and ultimately the homologation production rule is a good thing. It levels the sport. It provides privateers the opportunity to compete against the big factory teams. But on the flip side, it's what we're seeing. And there's been numerous stories on different teams, riders struggling and not having access to the bike, the suspension, the equipment they want, and being constrained by what the team is offering. That's a big reason why Cooper Webb left KTM is he literally was not able to get KTM to offer him the ability to run these more slender, less stiff forks. The chassis were a little bit smaller and he was just butting heads with them. And long story short, leaves the team, and literally a month later, they're all running the fork that Cooper Webb was trying to, get access to. So this is not new. It's ongoing, but it's going to be interesting to see because generally the sense is they're riding that bike. They're not going back. They are allowed to. You can go to a previous year model, but the manufacturers pretty much never want you to. So if there was a little bit, if I was them, I'd be like, just put me on the bike. Who cares? If it gets out, it gets out. Would it really affect, I get both sides, but it'll be interesting. Tell me what you guys think. Like I said, I rewatched it, and Chase Sexton looked incredible. Eli Tomac looked incredible, and Hunter and Jett looked a little off. They both, they crashed 3 times combined. So A1 jitters, possibly bike not quite there, very likely. So we'll see next week. They're in California testing, trying to get this bike figured out. It is going to be exciting to see. Tell me what you guys think, especially funny because I literally did a video about why the Lawrence brothers and Jett specifically on that Honda is a dangerous combination. And then they go and make me look dumb. So that's kind of funny, but leave me a comment. Tell me what you think and hope you enjoyed the video.